Perek Tes. The Alter Rebbe, on the top of Peyamid Beis, Emes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, introduces us to what we would call, in other places, Save of Kalalmin, or Shlila, as opposed to Amal Kalalmin and Chiyuv. In other words, we talk about Eses Sfiris, and we say, Hu Yadeya, Hu Yadu, and Hu Amada. There's a lot of reasons, we'll see later on in Perek Yud, he's going to go back to it. What's the point of Eses Sfiris and Amal Kalalmin and Chiyuv? But on the Madrega of Save of Kalalmin, on the Madrege of Shlila, you can't say by the Eibishter, Hu Yadeya, Hu Yadu, and Hu Amada. So he explains. When you talk about the world, and you extrapolate backwards, you look at the world and you say, what do we see about Elakus? He says, you see only 5 madreges in Elakus. Just like in a person has basically 5 madreges, Seichel, Midas, Machshava, Diba, Maisa. When you look at the world and you extrapolate backwards, say, what do we see of Hashem in the creation? We see these 5 madreges. And the emes is, these 5 madreges, not the pshat that all there is. This is the 5 lowest madreges of theoretically bligavul madreges. And as a consequence, when you're talking taka be'emes about the Eibishter, to say Hu Yadeya I do and Amad is an insult. To say Eses Sfiris by the Eibishter is an insult. The Gabi HaKadosh Baruch, we talk about the Eibishter. Madreges HaChochma, the level of Chochma. She'itchilas Machshava V'Reishisa, which is the beginning of the Eibishter's thought and the head of his attachedness and relationship with the creation. These two Lashenis, Tchilas HaMachshava and Reishis HaMachshava, very interesting. You know the Lashon. Seif Maise B'Machshava Tchila. Van a Lashon Chsidis. Seif Maise B'Machshava Tchila Yoiser Mi Bereish HaMespashet. That's a Lashon. Seif Maise, there's more. The Seif Maise is rooted in Machshava Tchila more than in the Reish. Tchila is higher than Reish. So he uses both Lashenis. Chochma Sai Tchilas HaMachshava and Sai Reish HaMachshava. Tchila is higher than Reish HaMachshava. But even Tchilas HaMachshava is only Chochma. And therefore Seif Maise is like a bit of Eibishter, it's Seif Maise. Now, over here Seif Maise doesn't mean what I just told you. Over here Seif Maise, Machshava Tchila means that in the final thing Hashem does, you see Tchilas HaMachshava. Here Seif Maise means that Seif Maise, Legabe de Eibishter, this whole Machshava is only, the Shet in Hemshech Ayin Tes. Lashon Ayin Tes, you have this sugya, Seif Maise Tchila this way, and also in Friedrich Rebbe Mitzadik Hey, which is based on Ayin Tes. Seif Maise, Machshava Tchila, he teaches that what is Machshava Tchila, Legabe de us, is to the Eibishter Seif Maise. Sometimes they say Seif Maise, Machshava Tchila, that in the end you see the beginning. Here we teach that what's to us the beginning is to him the end. Verstehst? It's an opposite teach. You understand? Seif Maise Etzli. The Hainu, in other words, that when you're talking about Atmos, Shenechshavet, that it's considered Kili B'china Madreges Asiyah Legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Compared to the Eibishter Chochma, which is to us the biggest expression of Elokus in creation, right? In other words, Memalech Chiyuv is Hu Yadeya Hu Yadu Hu Amada Hu HaChocham VaChochma VaYischakmus, which is the highest of the 10 Sfiris. Legabe Eibishter, it's nothing. In other words, Legabe Save of Kalam and Legabe Shlil, it's nothing. Kediksiv, it says in the Pasuk, Kulam B'Chochma Sisa, everything was created with Chochma, and the Alter Rebbe is obsessed with this. That what's the type Kulam B'Chochma Sisa, that Chochma is considered Kasiyah Gufnis Etli Yisbarach. I'm willing to bet that this is a tale that heard from his Rebbe. The way the Alter Rebbe kochs in this word. What's that Kulam B'Chochma Sisa? Not that Hashem made everything with Chochma, but that even Chochma is Asiyah compared to Atzmos. I'm willing to bet that this is a tale that they heard from his Rebbe. I think he kocht in them. Alter Rebbe says it so many times, it's unbelievable. No, that Legabe de Eibishter Chochma is like Asiyah. That even though Legabe of Chochma is the biggest thing, in Legabe de Eibishter it's nothing. V'hainu leim, just mean to say, Sheke'erech chayes shebasiyah gufnis v'gashmis. If you were to do a measure of the amount of life that there is in physical Asiyah, physical and bodily Asiyah, La'erech chayes ha'chochma, when compared to the vitality of Chochma, Shureishis ha'meked, which is the head and root of a chayes shebe'odne v'chol abruim gashmim, of the life in man and all of the physical creations, because we said the beginning of his tashlos is Chochma, Kulam Chochma Asisa. Shehu, that this Asiyah is Ka'ayin Legabi Chayes Shebe'esiyas HaDibur. That even the Dibur of the Eibishter in creation is so much higher than the Ma'is Eibishter creation is like Ya'ayin and Yesh. Shehu, that this Dibur is Ka'ayin Legabi Chayes She'esiyas HaMachshava. That the words that Hashem speaks are insignificant compared to how much Hashem could think. Shehu, Ka'ayin Legabi Chayes U'Mailes Hamidus, which is nothing compared to the life and the step, the level of Midas. From which the thought comes. Shehu, that the midas are ka'ayin legabe chayis u'malas u'madreges ha'chachma min nevadas mekela midas. The midas kvayachal of alakus are completely insignificant compared to chachma bin adas, which is mekela midas, the root of the midas. Dr. Kain Mamish, when you realize it's 5 times nothing. Ma'aseh legabe dibur is nothing. Dibur legabe machshav is nothing. Machshav legabe midas is nothing. Midas legabe chabad is nothing. Dr. Kain Mamish, in a similar way, Mamish, Erech u Madreges u Ma'as HaChochma, the measure of the step and level of Chochma, Shehi, which is to us, Reishus HaMokar HaChayis, the head and root of life, Shebechol Oelam, it's the whole world that exists from Chochma, that Lagabi HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chveide V'yatzvei, compared to the Eibishter himself, that we're calling Save of Kalalmin, or Shlila, or Ein Sof, which you cannot say even Sfiras B'derech Shlila, Dr. Amerumim U'Misnase, which is lifted up and exalted. Ribei Riveves Madreges, myriads of steps, right? The Revava means 10,000. 10,000 times 10,000. Technically it's 100 million, but he doesn't mean that. He means Bligvo, Beinarech. Reimamus, of levels of exaltation, of height, of being of aboveness, to speak in Brooklynese. Yesed, more, Mireimamus Madreges HaChochma, of the exaltedness, of the step of Chochma, B'chinas Chayes Shabasiyah, over the life which is Vasiyah. Shehi, because the vitality of Chochma Lagabe Yasiyah is Reimamus Chomesh Madreges Levad, is only 5 steps away. Chochma, Midas, Machshava Dibur Maaseh, Shei Madreges, which are levels of B'chinas Asiyah, V'Dibur, or Machshava, or Midas V'Seichel. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter is Ramu Misnasei Madreges HaChochma. He's lifted up and exalted from the level of Chochma. Riveves Madreges Kilu Adin Ketz, Ke'elu Adin Ketz. Myriad such levels beyond the purpose. Taste this Azeh. That even though we're saying Goyadein or Yedun or Amadu, we're talking about Esses Sfiris, and as we agree with the Rambam in Atzilos, that there's Inyan Mamalek Kalam. We agree with the Rambam that there is Chiyuf. But when you compare it to Ein Sof, the Esses Sfiris are insignificant and they're nothing. Right? In other words, the Rebbe is saying now, the Maharal. I told this to you in the beginning, 2 days ago, Shir. Yeah? The Maharal says you can't say about the Eibishter Chochma either. The Rambam says Huaydein Edu Amada. Says the Rebbe, in Atzilos you could say Huaydein Edu Amada, but in Ein Sof it's an insult to say Huaydein Edu Amada because he's removed completely from it. Shlila. Or you could say it's Ein Sof. Okay, that's today's Shir.